the residents of the Grange and Wuthering Heights, which is basically Heathcliff. The idea of home and abroad, and the structure of the novel, and what does it mean and what does it add to the world of the novel when we have the insertion of Heathcliff into the world of home. He's an outsider. We talked about this one plenty. We said he came from Liverpool with Mr. Earnshaw to Wuthering Heights and to Yorkshire, basically. So if we look at the world within Yorkshire, what is it really a world of harmony even before Heathcliff arrived? Was it really, as they claim, a world of harmony? I urged you to think about these events metaphorically, and I told you to think about these two homes, Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights, as basically images of a rural past that is out of step with the modern operations that are happening in England. Now, these two belong to an older world, like I said. Then we have the stranger Heathcliff, who enters the world of Wuthering Heights and creates all that disruption and chaos. Now, Wuthering Heights and the Grange are also thought of when critics are looking at them. One of them represents culture, and one of them represents nature. One of them represents heaven, and one of them represents hell. All right, so we're going to look at these images. Nature versus culture, or basically country versus city. Now, it's a little bit complicated. Why? Because in a way, both of these homes represent nature as opposed to culture, because both of them are out of step with modernity. However, if we want to look at it from a Victorian perspective, all right, the nature versus culture opposition, basically, in the novel can be seen between country versus city, between tradition versus modernity. Now, when Lockwood arrives at the Grange, and he's a tenant over there, and we know he's a native of the South, all right? So the north to him is something completely different. It's foreign. It's then other, all right? And of course, the inhabitants of the north, basically London and the South, would be equally foreign to the inhabitants of the north. Now, Liverpool is where Heathcliff came from, and it's basically the center of urban modernity in this novel. Now, if we look at the sense of abroad in Wuthering Heights and the contrasting world of Wuthering Heights and the Grange, as we said, Heathcliff, when he went to the Grange, he said, "Oh, it looks like they're living in heaven." Why did he think of Wuthering Heights at the time as hell? That's all basically based on his characterization of what he thinks as a person. Because basically in Wuthering Heights, he was treated badly by Hindley. He was relegated, considered like a servant. He didn't enjoy any kind of liberty there. So, I mean, if we look at critic Queenie Leavis, when he looked at the characterization of Wuthering Heights as home, he says it's a home to a wholesome, primitive, and natural society that is pitted against the overdeveloped, all right, artificial culture of the Grange. So that's why Queenie Leavis says basically that the Grange represents culture, represents the society, what the society likes, what the society approves of. So let's say, you guys, I don't want to complicate it for you and get into that whole discussion of capitalism or whatever. I'll just basically simplify this for you. When you are reading the novel, think of the Grange as a place that the society approve of, all right? And Wuthering Heights and the development in Wuthering Heights is something that's unnatural to the Victorian society and that they don't approve of it. We don't have a nuclear family. the people who live in it are just like, you know, random, basically, you know, random just people that are put together, like that, like what Queen Levis says, primitive. He says pitted against. Terry Eagleton, he's also another critic, major Marxist critic. When he talks about Wuthering Heights, he says one of Wuthering Heights' more notable achievement is what? That it ruthlessly tries to demystify the Victorian notion of the family as a pious, pacific space within social conflict. And that point is very interesting, because what did we say about Wuthering Heights as a novel, guys? Does it follow the structure of a realist novel? Does it follow that? Does it follow what is considered a realist novel, or is it a hybrid novel?
It's a hybrid novel.
Good job. So it's a hybrid novel, which means that it doesn't follow the restrictions, it doesn't follow the structure of what these people anticipate a good realist novel to be. And so Emily Bronte already went against all of these notions. So of course, when she is making up these characters, she's not going to make them just regular realist characters. She's going to make them characters with weird personalities, with strange emotions, and that basically adds to these elements of romance. And again, remember that when we say romance, we mean something that's just you know, doesn't have to operate based on the regulations of realism. It doesn't have to make sense. It can contain ghosts and it can contain unnatural things according to what the Victorians, of course, consider natural. And so when Terry Eagleton says one of the achievements of Wuthering Heights as a novel is that it ruthlessly demystifies Victorian notion of family. What was Lockwood's first impression about the people who inhabit Wuthering Heights when he went there? What was his first comment on them? That they don't look like a normal family, right? And basically Terry Eagleton is saying that is the success of this novel hinges on this difference. All right? So just keep that in mind. Now, if we look at the sense of abroad in Wuthering Heights, it's the obvious choice. Who do you think represents abroad in Wuthering Heights? Heathcliff. The most obvious choice, right? So he's a representative of abroad. He is a person who's thrown into a domestic world, a local domestic world of the novel. He enters the domestic scene from the streets of Liverpool. Now, he complicates all oppositions because he is a figure of the city, but he's also wild. So do you guys like now understand how complicated the characterization of these people and the novel? This novel is really complex, by the way, because it's not just an easy, like, okay, Heathcliff represents the city, so he's modern. No, he's not really modern. He does represent the city. He does represent the world of abroad and the connection of Liverpool to the rest of the British colonies. But at the same time, he's also a wild man who lacks any kind of refinement. And so that puts a further complication when we are viewing his character. Please, Iman. Yeah, okay, good. I just was going to say mute yourself. Keep yourself muted, guys, if you're not speaking. Here is Timothy Dalton's playing Heathcliff in the movie adaptation 1970. And of course, he is represented here as a vampire, all right? Because as I told you guys, it doesn't matter whether Heathcliff is a vampire, whether he's Irish, whether he's gypsy, whether he's okay. And because, like I said, numerous descriptions about Heathcliff's origins basically refer to him as dark-skinned and also that he's a gypsy. It doesn't really matter as long as he is the obvious other who is thrown into the world of the novel. Again, other possibilities about Heathcliff being the racial other, especially in chapter 7 in the novel, when Nilly is talking about Heathcliff, she talks about him in an exotic way. And so the way that Heathcliff is represented in the novel goes basically through several stages. First of all, he is viewed as an exotic other, all right? Mysterious, but interesting. And Nilly basically says, oh, maybe, who knows? Maybe your father was an emperor of China, you know, because we don't know who he is. So you can imagine whatever you want about him. And your mother, an Indian queen. I mean, this is basically hilarious. His father, the emperor of China, and his mother, the queen in India. It just shows you to what extent these people are willing to just, you know, entertain their own sense of the other into thinking of them as exotic people. Yeah, go ahead, Iman.
Yes, hi, Doctor. Good afternoon. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was wondering, the chat doesn't work with me.
Yeah, it doesn't work with people. Maybe I have to add them manually. But again, if someone wants to participate, you can just raise your hand and talk. You don't have to use the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. So again, guys, when we see this whimsical notion by Nellie Dean about where Heathcliff's origins might be, it kind of foreshadows, the later segment in the novel when Heathcliff goes mysteriously off for 3 years and he comes back with all that money and all that wealth. So it also suggests something else, that there is a growing awareness of English people, and there are basically the English people's awareness of their connections to the rest of the world, especially India. Why? Because India was a British colony, or was to become actually a British colony officially, where Queen Victoria became Empress of India. And so, and it just shows you that they're kind of fascinated by the Orient, the Middle East, the Far East, okay? And that's why she is basically talking about Heathcliff in this very exotic way. Now, of course, and again, I even put you an example here, and I told you if you want to think about it, these stereotypes still exist in today's world in orientalizing the other. And we have basically in today's world, the West, with their perception that so many people in the Arab world probably are wealthy from the oil money. We have many rap singers in the West singing about Arab money, right? And so it just shows you that this is a misconception about people, that they're all wealthy and have oil money in the Arab world. It's a stereotype. And so the same here goes with how Nellie Dean is viewing Heathcliff as possibly his father is an emperor of China and his mom is probably some queen in India. Now, is it possible that Heathcliff might be depicted here in the novel as Irish? Well, probably. Well, we do know that we had Ireland was a British colony, and we have the Irish famine, the potato famine that happened in Ireland, forced millions of Irish people to migrate, basically, and leave Ireland, go to America and go to England. And so many of them basically came to Liverpool. And there is an instance where Emily Bronte was listening to a story by her brother talking about his time when he was in Liverpool, and how a lot of orphans, a lot of Irish orphans and boys were just basically roaming the streets of Liverpool and begging people for money. So basically Heathcliff's characterization and the color of his skin can fall into that characterization. But also just remember you guys, when it's basically said that he has wild hair and he has a dark skin, that there's an implied English stereotype here about Irish people of the time. A stereotype is something that makes no sense. Anyone who's considered to you an other becomes the center of that stereotype. There were many little children who are English, by the way, in the 19th century, who used to um, uh, be on the streets, barefooted, all right, with raggedy clothes, and English people called them street Arabs. Were these children Arabs? No, but they're basically associating the Arabs with being savages, with being, uncouth, with being uncivilized, and that's why they called these little children who used to, those orphans who roamed the streets barefooted and all that. They used to call them street Arabs. Now, Heathcliff and colonialism. Like I said, Terry Eagleton said that possibly, but by no means, certainly, Heathcliff may be a gypsy. Again, that's a possibility. Like Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre. Or like any kind of alien. The idea here is just to know that he's an alien who's basically brought into the world of England, a racist world. Does this remind you of the racist world of the Venetians? And when we were working on Othello in 1838, very similar circumstances. Go ahead, show we have.
Yeah, hi, Miss. I
Doctor.
just have a comment about the children were orphan.
Yes.
And why they call him Arab? Because what? And
I already
savages.
said. I said because they were savages and uncouth, and
Why?
basically because the British people were at the time racists who basically thought of Arabs as being savages. So if they see these little children who are English as uncouth, roaming the street barefooted, they just basically call them street Arabs.
Still, they are savages if they called little people, children, savages. Really.
Well, the idea is about the association. It's that they're associating them with something that's not them. The idea is to further yourself from this class and say these people are not us. They don't represent us. That's the idea here. When you use a stereotype, it's basically to say I'm superior and these people are inferior to me. So that's the whole point.
The British people so proud until now, so very proud. Really.
We're not generalizing, of course. We are talking about a specific.
But
we're talking about a specific class. Basically, we're talking about the bourgeoisie. All right.
Yeah.
And so the bourgeoisie who were assuming power around that time of the century, who were basically the people who made the money and were the real ruling class of England. And so they're furthering their association from the working class people. So these children that I was just talking about who are roaming the streets, these children belong to the working class people. And so the bourgeoisie want to distance themselves from that association with the working class people. Okay?
Thank you, Doctor.
Sure. So again, you guys, like I said, Heathcliff here is the colonial other who is thrown into Yorkshire, the world of what? But you guys, these people who are locals, and he's just an outsider, and he's a threat. He is perceived as a threatening force. What? To challenge this world and disrupt what? The natural world of Yorkshire. So just keep that in mind. That is the connection of world of what? Abroad and home. So home is Yorkshire. Heathcliff thrown into the world of Yorkshire causes that what? Disruption to the world of home. Now, again, if we look at Heathcliff's foreignness, it has historical origins with the contemporary text of our novel. He, according to your book also, represents the experience of society's marginalized and dispossessed class. He represents the working class. He represents the outsiders. He basically, he's not, of course, a regular black. His ethnicity is uncertain. Like I said, he might be a beggar. He might be an Irish. He might be whatever. All I want you to know is that basically Heathcliff represents the marginalized people, marginalized who do not belong to mainstream society. All right? Doesn't belong to mainstream society. Again, this is more about Liverpool. You can look at this later. And more about the mystery of Heathcliff's origins. Here's an adaptation, a film adaptation, 2011 adaptation, where Heathcliff is clearly shown as an African kid. Amna, go ahead.
Yes, Doctor, please. I have a comment. Even when Kathy, the daughter, become a wife of Heathcliff's son, Catherine Earnshaw become Linton, but never Heathcliff, and this is like showing that he have no class, no last name, no like
yes, exactly. Yes, it just shows you the extent of how he is really basically uprooted. You guys know what the word uprooted? He doesn't have any genealogy. And so, as you said, he doesn't really have that last name. All right. So no acknowledgement of who he is. He's just this outsider alien. And so again, guys, the possibility, because you see this film adaptation where Heathcliff is shown here as an African, another possibility. You know, where did Mr. Earnshaw bring Heathcliff from? He brought him from Liverpool. And Liverpool, you guys, was the center of slave trade. The center of slave trade. So is there a possibility that he could have been an African and not an Irish? Also another possibility. So guys, this is why Liverpool is important. Liverpool is important because it gives us so many possibilities and connections of England. The chapter in your book emphasizes the theme of home and abroad. So basically, Liverpool here functions as home, but connects you to the world of abroad. Now, the moment you are connected to the world of abroad, you are perceiving threats. Why are there threats? Because the people that you're connected to, the people that you are basically colonizing, they can come to you, right? Do you expect to colonize the others and the others might not come to your country? Yeah, they might, right? And so here's basically the connection of Liverpool to all of these British colonies. And Liverpool was the center of slave trade. So there might be a possibility that Heathcliff might have been a slave and Mr. Earnshaw bought him and then basically just treated him like a son. Or did Mr. Earnshaw basically actually have Heathcliff with a slave woman that he probably had an affair with and she gave birth to Heathcliff? We also don't even know. All I want you to know that a lot of the Yorkshire families made their wealth, made their fortune and all of their money from slave trading. Now, if we look at the protagonists of 19th century British novels, a lot of them, and I told you this even last time, I said a lot of them went abroad, they made money and they came back. So Heathcliff wasn't a weird, like different example when I said that Heathcliff went away for 3 years and then he came back with all that wealth. Here are examples. I'll leave them for you if you are interested in them. Like Pip, for example, in Dickens' Great Expectations. He also went to Egypt. Again, see, foreign and exotic. And he came back as a successful businessman. Again, if we go back to the sense of abroad in Wuthering Heights, the fact that Heathcliff lacks genealogy, and we can't pinpoint him, or we can't label Heathcliff as a one thing. He's so many different things, all right? And that's why he is connected to the post-colonial world. Even when it comes to cultural studies, and we study the character of Heathcliff, he has so many possibilities that he is linked to. Even your book goes out of its way to say that maybe Heathcliff, in a modern sense, can be viewed as a terrorist. And you know, the word terrorist is a new modern word. It didn't even exist then. But they said in the modern sense, he might be viewed as a terrorist. I really don't know, like, how your book, I think, is just like being like, I don't know, just going really out of its way to suggest that. Now, if we look at the idea of the uncanny, now, first of all, Heathcliff is presented as an exotic figure. Interesting, different, cool, but maybe dangerous, all right? Now, if we go to the uncanny, and you already, all of you were in 830A, and you know what the uncanny means. And you know all about Sigmund Freud and all that, so I'm not going to go into the details. But an important thing that I want to remind you of about the uncanny is what comes into the world of home, okay? So something that's not familiar that comes and inserts itself in the world of familiarity, right, guys? And in this sense, who creates who creates the notion of the uncanny here in Wuthering Heights? Heathcliff. He's the outsider. He comes, he inserts himself, literally comes, and he's inserted to the world of the home, all right? And so basically we have this disruption in the world of the novel, or the world of Yorkshire. All right, let's see. Okay. The grotesque. Now, so like I said, the characterization of Heathcliff goes through so many different stages. First of all, he's the exotic. Second of all, he's the uncanny. What is the uncanny? The uncanny is what is strange that comes and inserts itself in the world of the familiar. All right. Number 3, the grotesque. And it's not showing on the screen because there is a problem today with Teams where not all the slides are basically shown. But I will basically have to explain it to you, and then you can go to LMS and download my PowerPoints and see it there. So the grotesque, you guys, is another quality that we can associate with the uncanny. The literal meaning of the grotesque is strange, mysterious, magnificent, fantastic, ugly, hideous, unpleasant, disgusting. And generally, Halloween masks are always, do you know Halloween masks, the scary ones? Have you ever seen that Scream mask? Have you watched the movie Scream with the mask?
Yes.
All right. These are associated with the idea of the grotesque, disgusting, unpleasant, but yet mysterious. So Heathcliff, at the end here, when he had that whole tension going on with Catherine, when she married Linton, he is described in terms of the grotesque. Of course, Nelly Dean, she says that about him. Even Lockwood basically says that about him. Nelly says that he might be a ghoul. Ghoul, have you ever heard of that word? Or vampire. So suddenly his mom was an Indian queen, and his dad some Chinese emperor, sorry. But suddenly he's maybe a vampire or a ghoul or whatever. So do you see the stages of Heathcliff's representation of being something mysterious and nice into being something suddenly so scary and alarming? And even Nellie, she says his behavior when Catherine died, and the way he looked up and his gazes really reminds you of a creature. That's exactly what Nellie said. She said a creature of another species. So she's even trying to say that he is not human. All right. Can we play this music video by, if we go to the apparition of Kathy, the ghost of Kathy in the window, there's a song by Kate Bush in 1978 that basically nicely illustrates this. Let's see if I can play it. I really don't know. I haven't tried to play YouTube on Teams. I'll try to see. Okay, just a second, guys. I'm going to try to. All right, where do we click? Window. Okay, guys, can you see? Can you see? Guys, can you see the screen?
Yes.
What is happening here? Where's my PowerPoint? Oh, where did the PowerPoint disappear? All right, let me just pull the PowerPoint back, you guys. What a complicated thing. Replace. All right, guys. So like I said, in this song by Kate Bush, it's just supposed to represent basically Catherine's ghost coming back for Heathcliff. You heard the lyrics. She's like saying, Heathcliff, I'm Kathy, I come home now. So basically, Catherine's ghost ultimately responding to Heathcliff and coming back. Now, the idea of the grotesque is not just something that's I mean, it was a motif that existed in other novels that are basically Gothic, all right? But again, we said here that Wuthering Heights is a hybrid novel that doesn't basically just borrow from one genre, one generic mode. It has several generic modes. So again, Home and Abroad can be both mapped onto the uncanny, with Heathcliff being basically that other, a matter of his uncanny nature as much as his foreign origin. So his nature draws that, and also the fact that we don't know where he is from. Now, we see that the atmosphere of terror reigns over basically the contemporary domestic sphere at Wuthering Heights, creating that element of the uncanny. If you read pages 305 and 306, you will see these details. Now, if we talk about Wuthering Heights and its connection to romantic poetry, Emily Bronte actually read a lot of romantic poetry, and we can see that she used some of that diction, all right, especially in Heathcliff's lines when he is speaking. Now we're gonna look at an example actually of that. And why is it used? Why did she use it? Probably to create a heightened effect, because it's just like it has the quality of something old and just like rhythmic and different. And so, for example, Heathcliff, when he speaks, he says yesternight. By that time, the word yesternight was not something that people use. It means basically last night. And so we see that his choice of diction represents that borrowing of from romantic literature, and it has affinities actually with romantic literature, especially Heathcliff and Catherine's romantic union in the natural world. Do you remember, you guys, when Catherine was in her dream and she saw herself in heaven, she cried. She didn't want to be there. And so there is a great emphasis here that reminds us of romantic poetry, that God resides in nature, right, guys? Do you remember all that in 830A? God resides in nature. And nature is basically the place where the souls meet. And that's actually what is happening here, is that allusion to romantic poetry to underpin what these emotions, these weird emotions that Catherine and Heathcliff have, this passion, passionate declarations of a union of their souls. So their souls unite on earth. And do you remember at the end of the novel, what did Lockwood say? He said, when I was leaving and walking in the moors, I almost felt that I can see or feel the presence of Catherine and Heathcliff walking basically hand in hand, which he means basically they're ghosts, right? Here's a scene that actually I want to link, want to show you how Emily Bronte linked romantic poetry with the relationship of Catherine and Heathcliff, which just says the use of romantic poetry here, you guys, is to indicate and emphasize that their union doesn't have to obey the natural order of things. Because, you know, in the Victorian world, someone like Heathcliff and someone like Catherine are not supposed to love each other. They're not supposed to be with each other. So this just shows you that romantic poetry is associated with what? Defiance, with revolution, with doing things differently, with not obeying the natural order of things. And that's exactly what's happening here in this relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff. So even Catherine says in one line, I am Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is me, all right? And Shelley says in one of his poetry, and you know who Shelley is, I am not thine, I am part of thee. Do you see how closely aligned these two lines are? I am Heathcliff and Heathcliff is me. Shelley says in one of his poems, I am not thine, I am part of thee. Heathcliff also says to Catherine when she dies, come in, hear me, be with me always, take any form. So be a ghost, be whatever it is, just be with me. Take any form, drive me mad. He's asking Catherine to drive him crazy. I mean, what kind of normal person says that, right? But again, if we are to look at these moments and these lines in a more nuanced way and to study their effects in a more metaphorical way, we see that Catherine and Heathcliff's personalities are connected with revolutionary forces who don't obey society. And so they don't obey the natural order of things. All right, guys, just please keep that in mind. And what Heathcliff said here actually also recalls many verses from Lord Byron's poetry. So because Heathcliff is more of a Byronic hero. Now, if we enter the world of psychology in Wuthering Heights, all right, I told you before that basically Victorians were really obsessed with several studies and science during the Victorian time. Among them were among them was phrenology. The study of phrenology is no, it's not even it's no longer a thing that people study anymore in the modern world. But one of the psychoanalysis ways that they psychoanalyzed people was phrenology, where you analyze someone's behavior based on their race, based on their gender, All right? We don't do that anymore, of course. Where people say women are just naturally crazy. Women, like all women, like, oh, she's screaming, she's an insane person. All right? A class, that you are naturally born to this class because this is the class that you should be part of. Slavery. Do you know how slavery was justified? Does anybody here in this class know how slavery in America was justified? On what premise was it justified?
Because of their color. Like, they used to think that white people are more the upper class or more entitled to everything more than black colored people.
How were they able to enslave people and just like, say, I'm enslaving these people? So like, how can that even happen? Can you enslave another human being? Unless you actually say this is not.
They actually took from them their dignity and they made them think that they're not entitled of everything. How can I say it? They crushed their spirits. They made them think that they're less than a human being.
Who's speaking? Sarah, we have, right?
Sarah.
Yes. Yes, the idea here, guys, is that what I want you to keep in mind is that they were not considering them human to begin with. So they're not even humans, all right? To these people, they're not humans, so we can do whatever we want with them because they're not humans. We can own them, we can shoot them, we can kill them, we can treat them, we can breed them, right? Breeding them. You put two people, you make them have intercourse so you can breed them and have children and sell their children and so on and so forth. So basically, they were treated like animals. Why were they enslaved? Because of the Western European man thought that the African person is not a person. I mean, as simple as this. And so basically, this is how they justified this atrocity. It's it's an atrocity. And this is how they justified it. I mean, it's really Africans were stolen bodies who were working in stolen land because the colonization of America is basically Native Americans, right? And this is how capitalism works in the most brutal fashion. And this is how you justify mistreating these people in this way. And this is really what's happening here, that when you analyze these people psychologically speaking, you're in the study of phrenology, you say that we should be dominant. We are dominant because we are strong, because we're creative, and these people are not even people. They're relegated to something worse than people, and that's why we can basically just think of them that way. And this really applies to Heathcliff and his treatment by Hindley. Hindley, Catherine's brother, this is how he degraded him. He basically made him feel like he's even less than an animal, right? And so it's natural for us to see Heathcliff wanting to revenge like that. When he made Hareton, Hindley's son, become a servant, and he didn't allow him to read or write or even learn. He was basically illiterate, right? So we kind of understand where Heathcliff comes from when he does that. Now, the study of phrenology, it's a psychological theory, like I said, and it's based on studying the human faculties based on the shape of our skull. So basically, I look at the shape of your head, and I decide how good or bad you are based on that, and that you have competing faculties in your head. I mean, it was really rudimentary, their study, that they thought our brain, you guys, has one part of it that's good and one part of it is bad, and one of them is trying to take over the other one. All right? So it's like, and of course, I mean, this is like nonsensical and it makes no sense. Here, look. The brain and how you think of, like, you just divide it into places of impulse, places of caution, etc. And so based on this study of phrenology, we have Heathcliff being analyzed by people as, based on his appearance, they're saying he's bad. Do you understand what's going on here? So per phrenology, if we are looking at Heathcliff's eyes or his cheeks or his face, these people say that you can tell how bad he is based on that. Nelly says a ray fell on his features. The cheeks were sallow and half covered with black whiskers, the brows lowering, the eyes deep and set singular. I remembered the eyes. All right. So basically trying to say how bad this person is based on an inherited physical characteristic that you have. And again, we said this is nonsense. No one believes that. Unless you're like a racist person, then you believe that. Now, if we go to theology and domestic ideals, this is something that we discussed before, so I'm not going to go into details about it. Catherine refuses to believe that the Christian religion, which is Protestantism at the time, of course, is the right religion for her. She believes this religion is filled with hypocrisy. And you remember when she said she woke up in Wuthering Heights when the angels sent her back to earth, and she woke up sobbing for joy. So to her, we have a reversal. We have here actually not only a reversal, we're subverting things, you guys. So what's considered the logical thing becomes the illogical thing, all right? And so the protagonist, we have Emily Bronte here, says that Catherine believes that earth is heaven, and the heaven is not even heaven. I mean, as people who believe in the Abrahamic faiths, like Islam, Christianity, and all that, people who believe in these religions don't believe that. However, per Catherine, basically, that any religion, any followers of a religion where you are exploiting people, like Heathcliff was exploited, is not considered it's just like not considered fair. And so she doesn't follow the conventional, let's say, Christian world view. And again, the novel here then disrupts the distinction between home and abroad, between heaven and hell. What is heaven? We know what heaven is generally, but Emily Bronte here is seeking to collapse them together. Do you know what it means to collapse? So when you collapse that, you start looking and like not figuring out what is really religion, what is really hell. And so the relationship between hell and heaven becomes a more complex one, because Catherine and Heathcliff believe that when they're buried together in earth, that is within the earth, then that is their heaven. All right. And so here we have a systemic reversal of biblical hierarchies. When you say that heaven is within the earth, then you are reversing a hierarchy. You guys know what a hierarchy is? Something from like high, lower, lower, lower. Suddenly, whenever we speak of heaven, we always imagine heaven above us, right, guys? But suddenly, these two people are saying heaven is within the earth. So we have a reversal. Remember this word: reversal of biblical hierarchies. Now, also another thing. Do you think Emily Bronte, it wasn't like a thing that just happened coincidentally that the most stupid character in the novel, who is old Joseph, is the most religious one? Is that a coincidence? Or do you think she intentionally wanted to do that? Yeah, to show that people who are uneducated and people who are plunged into religion are actually the most like illiterate people. We have in their in their book, The Mad Woman in the Attic, okay, Sandra Gilbert and Suzanne Gubar are two feminists, okay, who wrote the Mad Woman in the Attic, and they talked about the subversion, okay, of dominant traditions in the Victorian times and how to go against them. That basically the rebellious attitudes of going against these. One thing I just want you to know here about it, about Gilbert and Gubar. Just a second. I don't want to give you all these details because it's just too much. Okay, this is part of the same thing. All right, just a second. All right, Gilbert and Gubar's reading of Bronte's relationship with Milton. We have the fallen angel, Satan, in Paradise Lost by Milton. Heathcliff is characterized as the fallen angel. Gilbert and Gubar, they revise that myth of the fall of woman from hell to heaven, fall into culture. And so these two say that this novel actually is about Catherine. Basically, Gubar and Gilbert say this novel is not about Heathcliff. He is not the center of the novel. This novel is about a woman who rebels against her society. And this woman, all right, the central tale of the fall of woman and her shadow self, Satan. So here, Heathcliff becomes Catherine's shadow, Catherine's alter ego. If we are not to look at Heathcliff as a person, if we are to look at Heathcliff as Catherine's alter ego or her shadow, he is the rebellion inside Catherine. Do you guys understand what I'm trying to say here? Gubar and Gilbert say, let's say this novel is about Catherine, the older Catherine, of course. Heathcliff represents the stormy passions in Catherine, her yearning, her longing to basically challenge her society. I'm not an angel of the house. Remember the angel of the house? I am not going to follow the rules of my society. I want to go against them. So Heathcliff represents something inside of Catherine, again, according to Gilbert and Gubar. And so they both say this novel becomes a female Bildungsroman, all right? And where it's a novel of a development of the female character who is basically Catherine. All right. I just want to see if there's anything here important. All I wanted to say, there are some of you who are saying Catherine is selfish, Catherine is so-and-so, and I urge you last time we met not to look at the novel in these simplistic ways or simplistic views. Now, feminism and feminist critics have made us what's conscious of what? That the novel has a dramatization of female rage. Catherine Earnshaw, she basically keeps on rebelling until the moment of death. And death at this point is, if you want to look at death in terms of a figure of speech, she is a woman who is subjugated to a certain choice. She, by her marriage to Edgar, according to Gilbert and Gubar, when she married Linton, she starved her true nature, her uncivilized nature, all right? And thus, basically, she died. She died because she has these natural impulses in her that couldn't be fed, all right? When they couldn't be fed, Catherine basically died. So we go back to the opposition of civilization and culture. Wuthering Heights basically dramatizes the struggle of nature versus what? Civilization. We have a reflection of romantic ideas of nature being superior to culture. And we see this in the relationship, of course, between Heathcliff and Catherine, and how they refuse that sense of refinement and they embrace their passionate union. So Edgar, in a way, is appropriate culturally. Culturally speaking, who is the appropriate husband for Catherine culturally? Guys?
Edgar?
Edgar.
Yes. And who's the person who basically, according to your book, clutches her soul? The person that she finds her true self with?
Heathcliff.
Heathcliff.
Good job. Yes, yes. So basically, this is the opposition. That's all I want you to know about this opposition between nature versus civilization. And basically, in a way, if you want to think about it symbolically, Catherine's death is not necessarily a defeat. It's not necessarily a defeat of nature. It's basically saying, I refuse to participate in this. Yeah, Omar, go ahead.
I have a question. Was Catherine forced to marry Edgar, or was it her choosing? Because if it was her choosing, I mean, it's her fault.
No, it's very simplistic to say it's her choosing and it's her fault. When you are born in a specific society where the society brainwashes you ideologically and manipulates you to behave in a certain way, and that way is considered acceptable, then you can't see a way out of that. Do you get what I'm saying here?
Yes, yes. So she was like socially forced to marry Edgar.
Of course.
Because of her like standing and his name.
Of course, definitely. So it's not a matter of, okay, I choose to marry him or not. That's your society raises you in a way, you're raised up in a way, and you're brought up in a way that this is the only logical choice. Anything else you do, the whole society will deem that as inappropriate and something that's completely wrong.
Yes.
Got it, guys?
Thank you, doctor.
Yeah. So again, guys, in my opinion, of course, is that the world of the Grange is actually a much repressive environment than the world of Wuthering Heights, because it's the society. Really, the Grange represents society. Wuthering Heights is more humane because it represents the human nature. That's something, the freedom of your true nature and who you are. And that's why Catherine tried to live in the Grange, but she really couldn't survive it. Why? Because according to Gilbert and Gubar, the Grange symbolizes the crippling repression of women with middle-class domesticity. See, Umar? Because Catherine is born naturally to be rebellious. When you are born as a free bird and you're caged, then you try to go with that. You try to follow what the society wants of you, but you can only go so far against your natural self. But if that is so crippling and so repressing to your true nature, then ultimately you will die. You will starve. Your true self, your true nature will basically starve, and then ultimately that causes the demise of Catherine. And so, yeah, all right, that's it. Now, if we want to think, now we're going to move actually to the second generation story in a little bit and deal with the turn of events and what's going to happen actually here. So let's just move. Okay, I have a lot of repetitions in these, and I just want to make sure that I just don't go over the same thing over and over again. All right, no. All right. Actually, this is important. Now, I want to emphasize one thing. Once we start to get to the second storyline, the second generation, guys, can you please remove the hand? Just, I don't want to be confused and think that someone wants to say something. So if you're done talking, just remove the hand, please. Please. So, in terms of genre, all right, in terms of genre, we notice that if you are reading the novel, I hope that you're done. If you're reading the novel, you guys, you notice that the first half of the novel is dedicated to the first story, the first generation. The second part of the novel it has the storyline of the second generation. Even in terms of the language, we said that the first generation storyline is associated with what? It's associated with revolution, romantic poetry, Gothic elements. The language is the opposite of what is expected. Now, when we go back to the second generation storyline, suddenly we have more subtle expressions. We have basically we have the story moving away from the Gothic mode into just a realist mode. Again, guys, from what? First generation, Gothic mode is the dominant one. Second generation storyline, the realist mode is the dominant one. All right? So we really don't have a lot of challenges with the second generation storyline. All right. All I want you to know when it comes to reading in Wuthering Heights is that we see many, many people reading. We see Lockwood reading the Diaries of Catherine. We see old Joseph reading from the Bible. We see the younger Kathy. Her books are taken from her, remember, by Linton, Heathcliff's son. He takes her books from her, and then ultimately she teaches Hareton how to read and write. Right? Okay, just a second. Yeah. So Hareton, he's desperate to learn how to read and write. And so here there is a suggestion that there's a healing here. Healing whom, you guys? Hareton. He was relegated to the position of what? A servant. Now he's no longer a servant. Kathy, the younger Catherine, she teaches him how to read and write. He acquires the skill of reading and writing. And so he joins culture. He goes back to his rightful status. Now, when Heathcliff discovers that Hareton now can read and write, he's completely disgusted and he loses interest in his revenge, and then he basically dies after that. Now, let's just see. Nellie Dean, we know the reason why she's a narrator is because she knows how to read and write. So that's also another element that's interesting in the text. Now, a divided afterlife is basically discusses film adaptations. All these slides discuss film adaptations. So you can look at these film adaptations about how Wuthering Heights continue to dominate even in today's popular culture as it's in movies and music. One point that I just want to make clear before we end our discussion on Wuthering Heights is that the second generation storyline of Kathy and Hareton, when they both get married, is that a rebellious marriage? Can someone answer me? When Kathy and Hareton get married and they decide to move back to the Grange, do you consider that a happy ending according to Gilbert and Gubar? Is she following in the footsteps of her mom? That's my question, really.
Yes, it's a happy ending because there is a changing pattern here, a new form of family, a happy one. Not like the first generation. There is lots of violence and forced marriage and revenge.
Good. Yeah, I mean, this is good as just a general interpretation, okay? However, I want you guys, when you go back and finish reading this novel, to ask this question. Hareton is Kathy's cousin. You know this, right? He comes from a rich family, really. Heathcliff made him into a servant, right? But what Emily Bronte is trying to say, if a rich person basically is relegated into a servant, ultimately he will go back to his rightful status. But if you are born into being what? A second-class citizen, if you are born into being Heathcliff, there is no way out of it. Heathcliff went and he brought money and all that. Did that make the other accept him? Did they accept Heathcliff when he came back with the money? Did they welcome him and be like, oh, everyone was nice to him? No, because Heathcliff remains Heathcliff, right? So this is one point that I want you to keep in mind. And then young Kathy, Catherine's daughter, Kathy, she teaches Hareton how to read and write. Symbolically, this means that she is giving him the power. She's saying, okay, now you're the boss, you're the head of the household, you're going to read and learn, you're going to read and write, and I will be your wife. So we see a shift in the power structure here. And we can see that difference between Catherine and Kathy. Catherine, the mom, was a revolutionary figure. Kathy, the daughter, is a person who decides to join society rather than step away from society. And so it's a happy ending in terms of accepting what society deems appropriate and going along with it. Now, to Gilbert and Gubar, that's suicide, and that's actually not a happy ending, because here we have basically all the revolution that happened in the first generation story, completely undermined. And then we have a second generation storyline that follows the costumes of your culture and just do what is expected to be done. And that's it. All right, guys? Anybody have any question before we end?